Alright guys, welcome to the channel. We have a very special guest today, Brian Miranda. Brian, thank you for coming onto the channel.
Thank you for introducing me, for having me here today. I'm happy to go over some of the stuff. Hopefully you can help answer some questions and get to know a little bit about the legal world.
Definitely. So look, I'm happy that you came on, Brian, because there's a lot of folks out there that are getting into real estate and they have a ton of questions. And you being a real estate attorney can definitely help guide us in some of these questions. But before we get started, just want to give you a little background on how Brian and I know each other. So, Brian and I have known each other since about the age of 6-7 years old.
Still trying to figure it out, yeah. Still diapers and shit.
Yeah, we were playing travel soccer together, right? Anyone that grew up in Hillside with us knows that.
Yeah.
Guys, I couldn't tell you how many times I got yelled at because of Brian. So Brian, if anyone knows, Brian was the model child, right?
I set the bar.
Yeah, Brian was a little angel compared to us other kids, right? So Brian, since a very young age, he was always in AP classes. He was a little angel, he was always very well behaved. And
I would call it superstar.
Yeah, you were the model child. If I have a son one day, I want him to be like Brian for sure.
I appreciate that.
So we, during the soccer games, the moms would talk right on the sidelines. And all the moms knew Brian was in AP classes, such a good boy. So anytime I got in trouble at home, my mom would tell me, "Por que não és mais like Brian? How aren't you more like Brian? Brian's such a good boy. AP classes, you just get in trouble, you joke around, And Brian's such a good boy." So funny story of, us growing up together, right? And it comes full circle now, right? Brian, the AP student, so well behaved. Real estate attorney.
That's right.
Me, I was, joking around, playing games, in school. Real estate agent and YouTube bullshitter. So here we are, folks. And
YouTube sensation.
YouTube sensation in the making. So look, we have Brian here, a good friend. So, Brian is definitely going to share some very valuable information with us today.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you for coming on, my friend.
No, anytime. And hopefully we get to learn, some information today, and hopefully maybe other sessions as well, other types of law, because the law is, it's a very big field.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And it's, there's a lot going on. So that's why we're actually going to break it down today, and we're going to focus on one specific topic, which is going to be evictions, right?
Yes.
So a lot of folks that are getting into real estate, are thinking about possibly getting into a multifamily, owning some property, having tenants.
Yeah.
The main thing I hear is, Brian, I don't want to deal with evictions. I'm scared of evictions. What if I get somebody in there, they don't pay, right? What if they damage the place? What do I do? So, I wanted to bring Brian on today to give you guys some insight on, the eviction process, preventing evictions, right, with proper screening. And Brian today is going to give us some good insight on what the eviction process looks like, right? And also some tips for screening to potentially prevent some evictions in the future. So, Brian, let's kick it right off. Eviction, what is it? What's an eviction?
So an eviction is a legal proceeding to remove a tenant from a property. Very different from sometimes New Jersey's an ejectment action, which is basically for squatters. Okay. So there's a big difference between the two. Anything we discuss today is only in relation to New Jersey law, because each state also has its own different laws based on evictions. New York is different, Pennsylvania, things like that. So a lot of us talking about New Jersey. The main grounds for eviction, which you'll find in most New Jersey, 90% of the cases, for non-payment of rent.
Okay.
Basically, your tenant stops paying you your rent. That's the most common grounds for eviction.
So, Brian, if I own a property today in my eviction, in my tenant, it's the first of the month, he hasn't paid the bill. Normally you give a tenant a grace period, right, up to the 5th until they can pay their rent. Let's say, it's the 7th and the tenant still hasn't paid their rent and now they're unresponsive, they're answering the phone. What are the first steps? What should you do as a landlord?
At this point, when you're owning your property, especially there, at that point, it's up to you. Depending on the rule. I always say talk to the tenant first, because once you go to court, obviously, you get an attorney, you go to court, the temperature of the water changes.
Okay.
So I say, listen, talk to them. If they're going through a hard time, maybe they just need to help break, split up payments, stuff like that. But anything you do, make sure to put it in writing. You always got to refer to the fact. For example, let's say we're in March, they use February. At that point, March is not being paid, and they're paying it late. Just say, hey, listen, if you come April, maybe they didn't pay you April. At that point, you say, whatever you're paying me now is for March, and you got to stagger it. So show that, hey, you're paying back rent, not this current month's rent. Okay. So you always there's little distinctions and things like that.
So what Brian is saying here is, see if you can work with the tenant on the first one. Now, if they're not willing to work with you, Brian, they stop answering you, or they're giving you the runaround, what are the first steps you take to begin the eviction process?
So let's say you talk to them, they just say no, or maybe they're just ignoring you. A lot of times they'll just ignore you, blow you off, kind of things like that. At that point, you'd have to file the eviction for non-payment of rent.
Okay.
All right, and that's basically you're stipulating to it. You can pull those forms online. If you're an LLC, if you own a property, it's an investment, you have to use an attorney to file the eviction.
Okay.
LLCs can only be represented by attorneys in New Jersey. Now, if you want to do it yourself, you're more than, I would say you can, but you will find out a landlord-tenant court is not as simple, and it is a process.
Okay.
So the way they changed it up now, it used to be one court appearance. So now what they're doing is once you file the eviction, let's say you file what's called a complaint to start the case, it goes to the court. Court processes it. They send out a summons saying, hey, you have what's called a case management conference. Okay. In New Jersey, it's all the counties are doing it. And so the case management conference, basically you and the tenant, they do it to virtual hearing. They get a mediator. If you're represented by the attorney can do the mediating with the other tenant, and you try to come to a resolution, some kind of agreement. Okay.
So first step, you said, I guess, is the
eviction complaint.
Eviction complaint, and you would reach out either if you want to do it as yourself as a landlord in your own name.
Yep.
If you're an LLC, you have to use an attorney. Yep. But even if you're a landlord doing it in your own name, I still would recommend hiring an attorney like Brian, because this is not easy, right? Like evicting someone, doing it by yourself. It's good to get a professional. Correct. Who knows what he's doing, what to file correctly, so you're wasting the least amount of time possible. So you do the first form. Yeah. From there, you said it goes to the court, and then
the court serves what's called a summons. Basically, they're going to send out a little postcard saying, "Hey, you have a case management conference." Like I said, case management is just basically a way at mediation to try to see if you can come to some kind of middle ground.
Both sides come to terms, right?
Correct. So, you're not required to appear. Certain counties will put no notices that you are required to appear. I always say everyone should appear, because if you can resolve it that day, even better. It avoids going to trial. Gotcha. And it is virtually, so you can appear on your phone, Zoom.
Okay, that's good.
Which makes it even more convenient for everyone. I think everyone has a lot going on in their lives anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
And to deal with something as stressful as not paying your rent and having to force someone out because they're not paying your rent. Yeah. I mean, it's not good for either side. I know landlords and tenants who, landlords who do it, and they don't enjoy it. It's not like they get pleasure out of kicking people out of their homes.
Yeah. So you try to work with folks. So Brian, from the first step until you get that mediation appearance, right? What's the time frame look like between the two?
It varies from county to county. Okay. Unfortunately, some of the counties are still backlogged. The only one I would say is kind of running on real time is Union County. Okay. Everyone else you have to give it a delay. Okay.
On average, would you say?
It varies by county. Okay, yeah.
And I can see that.
Yeah. So, for example, Essex County, handles I think something like 70% of the evictions in New Jersey. Okay. So they have hundreds of files each day. So you can imagine how backlogged due to the COVID pandemic as well. So it's always a situation. So it just varies county by county. That's why like you're saying before, the importance of an attorney, because they can go into and explain, hey, listen, this county's taking this amount of time. Like, for example, I'll tell you, Union County's move a lot faster. So once you file it, you may be able to get something much quicker. Okay. Now, if you go to Hudson County, at that point, that one's a little very different as well. So like I said, just the knowledge and experience of an attorney, especially when it just does landlord-tenant, is invaluable at that point.
Yeah, definitely. Brian can give you some real on-the-ground data, right, and realistic timeframes of what things are taking, because, you work with these various counties. Correct. And you see, this one's taking X amount of time, this one's taking Y, you know, because you have the, boots on the ground knowledge. Now, let's say you get to the mediation there in the court, and either the tenant doesn't show up or you can't come to terms that day. What happens?
So at that point, you're set for trial. Okay. Now and in Jersey landlord-tenant court, everyone is back in person. Okay. So let's say you go to CMC, you guys can't come to an agreement. I mean, up until the day of trial, even day of trial, you can come to an agreement. Okay. I mean, you can come to agreement at any time. But once the case management conference is done, you don't have it. At that point, they set it for trial. In person, trial means that day you better be ready, if you can't come to terms, to go before the judge. Okay, gotcha. And the judges, trust and believe, when you're set for trial, unless there's some kind of extenuating circumstance or something, they won't really adjourn it.
Gotcha. Okay. And if the tenant doesn't show up for whatever reason, it's pretty much adjourned. And
so that's another step. So let's say the case management doesn't work out, we go to trial. Trial's set for whichever date. Day of trial, they're going to do a calendar call. Depending on the kind, they might do 2 calendar calls. Most of the time they do 2. Like, they call the name the cases twice. Okay. So if the tenant doesn't show up, it's called default. So at that point, you lost your right to combat it. So the landlord at that point can file for what's called judgment of possession.
Okay, which is taking the property back?
So judgment of possession is 2-step process. So it's a little more detailed. So judgment of possession gives you the right to at that point apply for the warrant of removal. You still have to wait 3 business days after the judgment of possession is entered, but it gives you the right eventually to take to remove the tenant from the property. Now, if the landlord, let's say you landlord don't decide not to show up, you're running late, something happens, you don't notify the court, they dismiss your case and you got to start all over.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, it looks like it is a little bit of a process to get someone
Correct.
out based on eviction. Now, that being said, it's not, a free-for-all for tenants, right? Even though it's a little bit, of a process.
Correct.
There are some major implications to the tenant that's getting evicted. And Brian, can you maybe run through what some of those, implications for the tenant are? I know sometimes when you have an eviction on your name, it's impossible to get another place, right? Because if you're being
Correct.
screened by someone else, now all of a sudden you and your family try to get into a new home, and now you can't because the screening process sees that you have an eviction. So where are you
Correct.
really going to live, right? So
Yeah.
other than possibly staining your name for a very long time, what other implications does it have for a tenant that gets evicted?
So, I mean, at that point, the biggest thing, like you're saying, is they're going to have an eviction on the record, which no one wants, especially in a society where a lot of people are renting and you
Yep.
see a lot more people renting. It follows you. It's like, it's just
Yeah.
like a foreclosure or 500 credit score. It's gonna mess you up down the line, and you definitely don't want it because a lot more people now, are more than ever, are doing these heavy background searches. Something we could talk later on. And so if they see that there, guess what? It's a big red flag.
Yeah, you're not going to get a
They're
place.
not going to get the place.
Yeah.
And legally they can deny you at that point because guess what? You've had an eviction on your record.
Yep, 100%.
So you're not a reliable tenant.
No, not at all. And that's the biggest thing, folks. So, for a tenant that's possibly facing eviction, it's just not worth it, guys. Once you get that stain on your name, forget about finding a place, right? Where are you going to live? Where are you and your family, your kids going to live? Do whatever you can to work with the landlord, either to come to terms on payment or, if he can help you find another place or give you some time to find another place to get out and avoid the whole eviction process.
Correct.
Some things I've seen some landlords do is they do try to work with tenant, like Brian said, right? As soon as they miss that first payment, try to work with them. I've seen, landlords say, give them the heads up of what the eviction process entails, what it does to the tenant's record, and maybe try to work with them like, hey, look, I'll give you back half your security deposit. You just got to leave by the end of the month. Or I'll give you back your security deposit. You just got to leave. And some people will take the cash and run, guys, because people do not want an eviction on their name, right? Like, imagine you have kids and now all of a sudden you want to be in a better school district or want like some kind of decent housing. Any serious landlord, and a lot of landlords nowadays, especially with the whole rise of the internet and so easy to run background checks and screenings, a lot more people are doing it than ever, right? So once you have, some kind of, stain like that on your name that you've been evicted, you're going to have a very hard time finding a place. So it's definitely not worth it.
Yeah, so there's just some things that you were saying before, like alternative ways to resolving it. And I always say, like, if you could work it out, I mean, there's different, like you're mentioning, consent to vacate. You can say, hey, listen, you don't have to pay me this rent, just leave by the end of the month kind of thing. So there are options. At the end of the day, I mean, trust me, it's for either landlord or a tenant, it's not a favorable position to be in, especially a day when you're in trial in court. There's a lot going on, the judges, the mediators and things like that, the attorneys. So I say if you can work it out, try to work it out as best as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And in the case that you can't work it out with your tenant, obviously you want to hire a professional like Brian, to go, and file the process, right? So, look, there is a little bit of work, right, to be done with it, but, it's definitely doable when you hire a professional. But, the implications for the tenant are a lot more serious, guys. So, I wouldn't be scared of owning property and really worrying too much about evictions, because they do happen, right, once in a while. But, the process, if you have the professional on your side, is a lot easier. And a lot of times it's avoidable if you have, some soft people skills and can talk to tenants and really try to come to a fair agreement for both sides.
Correct.
I think it's best if you can work it outside the court, right? Because, it's a less of a process and headache, and if you can work, with the tenant, get them out, it's probably favorable for both sides. So Brian, we talked about, what the eviction process pretty much is, right? What it looks like from, reaching out to you filing the paperwork, you guys getting a mediated schedule with the court, and then the process from there. Now, what grounds does a owner have to evict someone other than just maybe they missed rent? Are there any other grounds you can evict them for?
So in New Jersey, there's something called a holdover tenancy. For example, if you're owner occupied, you're moving for them. For example, you serve a 60-day notice to quit, saying, hey, you have 60 days if the lease expires. If there's a valid lease, you have to wait till the lease terminates unless you come to some kind of agreement, rescinding the lease essentially, and that way they can move out earlier. But if not, you would have to serve a notice to quit saying, hey, you have to leave by when the lease terminates or whatever day period it may be. Let's say, for example, today is March, you'd have to give 60 days until the end of May.
Okay.
So hey, you have to vacate by that date. If they hold over, again, in New Jersey, even if they don't leave, you still have to go to the court to remove somebody. You can't do it yourself. Something called like self-help eviction, it's kind of the things you can't do as well. But you got to be very careful because there's certain things you could do that can be considered an illegal eviction in New Jersey.
Gotcha. Under
the Anti-Eviction Act. So there's just different things that, again, something you should talk to an attorney about if you're not sure exactly what's going on.
Definitely hire professional folks. When it comes to these legal matters, because it makes a world of a difference, and that's why I wanted to bring Brian on the show to give you guys a little bit more of a behind the curtain look on what the actual process looks like. Right.
There's a lot involved.
And Brian's been in the business a long time now. Brian, you've been attorney 7 years or so?
8 years. It's gonna be 8 years in May now.
8 years. So you've seen it all, right? You've seen pre-pandemic, pandemic, post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Are things getting easier in the courts, or is it still kind of it seems like everyone uses COVID as an excuse not to work? What are you saying?
It's a little different, yeah. I mean, the COVID situation, the moratorium is over at this point. Okay. So a lot of the evictions you see now, most of the courts, I will say, are caught up.
Okay.
So at this point, what you're seeing is cases from 2020, 2022, which at that point, any of what's called a DCA, for example, some of the government assistance we're rent is only up until December of 2021. Okay. We're already now in 2023, so a lot of the cases you're seeing are all from 2022. So there's no real protections at this point. Yes. So it's pretty much at this point, it's gone back to, let's say, regular, but again, there are obviously delays in the processing and things like that, like processing times and getting court dates.
Yep. Okay. Good.
So that's just something to consider.
And just curious, Brian. Let's say this takes a couple months, right, to process. Let's say you get the tenant evicted. Now, can you go after them for back rent?
So that's a great question. So what you have to remember in landlord-tenant court, it's for possession only. Keyword, possession. So for example, what you're seeking in landlord-tenant court is only to get the property back.
Okay, gotcha.
There's no monetary damages. Now, if you agree, for example, you come to an agreement, they're going to pay you X amount of dollars or whatever the situation may be, that's fine. But just know that's not monetary damages. So if there is back rent, so let's say you evict the tenant, let's say the tenant doesn't show up to court, you get the judgment for possession, they owe you 10 grand. You can still go after them for the 10 grand, but that's just a different case, that's a civil court. So that's a different process.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, so the landlord-tenant court, it's going to only give you, and I always tell because people are like, oh, I want the back rent too. I was like, well, if you do that, that's a separate matter.
It's a different process.
Correct.
To get the money from them.
Correct. It's another whole legal process. Okay. So that's just something also to balance. I always say it's a balancing of how bad do you want the back rent or do you want your property back?
Yeah. So if you go ahead and complete an eviction, can you then file a second proceeding to try to get that back rent as well?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So unless you, again, if you come to agreement and say I waive the back rent, or for example, let's say I owe you $5,000 and you say, you know what, if you only pay me $2,500, I'll let you leave in 45 days. Then at that point, you agree to a reduction balance anyway.
Okay.
So it also depends. But yeah, if they don't pay anything at all, it all depends on the agreement. But you any monetary damages for back rent, you'd have to go in civil court.
Okay. So, so there is a way to get your money back as well, folks. Not only just the property, which is what you're doing, what you're filing for when you get a, you go through the eviction process is to get the property back. But if you want to go ahead and get your back rent, it's a civil process, is what you're saying.
Correct.
And how are those taken about the same time as evictions? Or are they a little less, a little more? What do you think?
So it depends on the claim. So anything under 20,000 is in special civil part, between up to 20,000. So anything under 5 is small claims.
Okay.
Those move a lot quicker. Special civil part moves a lot because the course trajectory, it's usually within 3 to 6 months more unless you get a trial date. But anything over 20,000 is law division. Those cases are moving, but in the county, some of the counties are short judges as well. So I just,
there's a shortage of everything, guys. You got a shortage of rice, shortage of judges.
It's an interesting time to say the least. That's what I was saying, pre-pandemic, pandemic, post-pandemic. Yeah. At this point, we've gotten it's a very interesting time to be around.
Yeah, but look, you're getting some great, on the boots, boots on the ground experience. You're seeing exactly what's happening.
All right in the trenches for sure.
And you can set the expectation with the client, which is huge. So thank you for that. So we've gone through those. Now, so we talked about evictions, what they are, what the process kind of looks like. We talked about possibly working with the tenant, right, to get him out before an eviction. And then we also just reviewed, how to get any back rent back, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's say, Brian, we want to try to completely avoid the whole eviction process from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And that comes down to tenant screening. What are some things that you've seen, or some things a potential landlord can implement to screen the tenant to possibly avoid an eviction in the future?
A big thing of it, like you say now, is like background checks, credit checks as well, because it comes to like also you're looking at people's pay stub, salary, bank statement. A lot of times you do ask for like 3 months of bank statements, which is reasonable to ask, because at that point, you know, if they have $20 in their savings account and they're living paycheck to paycheck, who's to show that they're actually able to pay the rent, even though they'd be making $100,000 a year. But you know, it's very difficult. You can make a X amount of dollars, but if you're not saving or if you don't show anything, it shows that you're not a viable tenant essentially. So there's just little things like that you can do in order to vet somebody out.
To vet someone out.
I mean, you can ask for all that. Again, there are certain requirements of you know housing discrimination, things like that, and that's another thing to speak to an attorney about when you are getting tenants and how your lease. Most importantly, this all lays back to your lease as well, because there's certain things you can negotiate, things like that. But the biggest thing is honestly just preventing it is screening your tenants. I mean, sometimes you may have someone who may seem like the model tenant, and you know things happen.
For sure. Screening is so important, right? If you guys are interested in screening and managing your properties, there's a great book by Brandon Turner on managing rental properties. There's also another great one by Kenny McElroy, The Apartment King, where he talks about how to properly screen tenants and managing your properties, right? So a couple things that they mention in that book, they have a couple parameters that they set, right? So like Brian said, they run the credit check. Some landlords might say, hey, I only want to take folks with 620 or credit score. 620 or higher credit score. Second, people do income verification.
Correct.
Right? So let's say the rent is $2,000, and let's say the landlord's parameters for income, let's say he wants 3 times the rent. So that means the tenant or whoever the tenants on the property have to make $6,000. So if the rent is $2,000, the landlord sometimes want to see 3 times the rent, which would make it $6,000 between the folks renting the property. So if you have, person A and person B both renting the property together, husband and wife, if the husband makes $3,000, wife makes $3,000, now they met that $6,000 parameter. So you have the credit check, 620 or higher, parameter 2, income, right? Some people do 2.5, some people do 3. All depends on the rent. And then lastly, they look at, if there are any prior evictions.
Huge.
So, those are a couple parameters mentioned in both Kenny and Brandon Turner's books. Definitely get them if you're interested in purchasing property. I've actually given some of those books as gifts to clients who buy multifamilies with me. I provide them that book because it's so filled with information, right? So, to avoid evictions in the future, you guys really want to make sure you guys do a diligent job when it comes to background check, setting parameters for income, and checking for the evictions. Also, you can, like Brian said, you can ask for their bank statements as well, right? If someone showing you that they're making $10,000 a month and they have, $100 in the bank, what's going on there, right? Things aren't adding up, right? If they have a bad month, are they going to have enough reserves to be able to pay you? So that's something you definitely want to look at as well.
I mean, it's just so like also when you're buying a house, that people, the banks vet you the same way.
1,000%.
So it's fair that you're vetting them as well, because at the end of the day, what happens if they can't pay the rent? If you have a mortgage on the property, 100%. You're still on the hook for the mortgage.
Yep, 1,000%. So guys, it's very important from the beginning to do the proper screening. And that will hopefully, it's never 100%, but it'll mitigate it a lot more. You'll possibly have a lot less chance of running into an eviction if you do the proper screening up front. And in case that you do get to the eviction process, obviously you want to hire a professional like Brian here. Now, Brian, you spoke a little bit about the lease. Do you have a sample lease that, if someone reached out to you and wanted to, hire you, do you have a sample lease that you can possibly provide to the public, if they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I do have, I do commercial and residential leases as well. I do both sides of it. So if anyone reaches out, I'm always more than happy to prepare a lease for them. And depending, what they want to put, the terms they want to put in, if they're like no dogs and smoking, no pets, things like that, the usual standards, things like that. So there's always a workaround as well. But yeah, I'm more than happy to prepare a lease, especially if you're a first-time homeowner. That owns a multi-family. I have no problem preparing a template that you can kind of plug and play and use
for the future.
Your tenants as well.
So that's very good. Get base standard lease from someone like Brian, right? He can custom tailor it to whatever you want. Like he said, some people want dogs, some people don't want dogs, right? Yeah. Can you smoke in the property? Can you not, right? Hey, no noise after 9 o'clock, right? Like,
Correct,
Brian has certain things that maybe, you as a brand new landlord aren't thinking of. And he has a standard template that he can, adjust to you. And then once you have that template, into the future with your future properties and future turnovers, you can use that base template to adjust it which way you see fit.
Because when you're writing the leases, you gotta remember there's also certain terms in there that if it's not worded a certain way that it won't be enforceable. For example, let's say in your lease you don't put attorney fees as additional rent.
Okay.
You can't collect those attorney fees when you're filing for damages. Mm-hmm. So little things like that would knock things out.
Yeah, 100%. It's so worth it, guys. Imagine you try to save a couple bucks by making your own lease, and then you go to court and this thing's not even enforceable, right? Where you could have spent a couple bucks up front and got a lease that you can use now for the future and not just use it this one time. So definitely a good call out there. But Brian, I think that's most of it when it comes to the eviction process. Again, thank you for joining the channel today. It was great to speak to you. Get your expert knowledge on the topic, and hopefully we'll continue to do more of these video sessions. But again, my friend, thank you. Any words you want to close out?
No, I hope you learned a little bit about evictions. Again, it's not as easy or simple as we made it seem. We try to kind of streamline it for you guys. But again, I always say if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to my office or to any attorney you want, or message Brian. He can send our link and things like that. But again, it's I always say, like, the money you spend, especially for an attorney, just to get that peace of mind or just advice it so you don't get yourself in trouble. Is always worth it. I always say people are like, oh, the cost. I'm like, listen, it's an investment.
100%.
And that's what it really is.
And you're protecting yourself, right? You got someone that study the law, is in the trenches, can let you know what's going on and what to expect. And again, it alleviates a ton of headache from you as a landlord or a first-time landlord. I'm sorry, but it's also protecting your asset, because at the end of the day, it's not like you pay $20 for that house. That costs you at least a couple $100,000 on the very minimum, depending where you purchase. It's probably your biggest purchase you ever made, right? So,
and likely will be. So it's always like I always say, the little the money you put in for it's an investment.
1,000%. So Brian, again, thank you for coming back to the channel, my friend. It's been a long time coming, and the boys are here.
That's right. You two sensations coming along.
That's it. So we're trying to bring you some valuable stuff, guys. Stay tuned. Hopefully we'll cover some different topics as you and I discuss going forward. But again, guys, thank you. Welcome to the channel. Again, Brian Miranda out of Westfield, New Jersey, real estate attorney. Brian, what other type of clients do you represent other than real estate?
Like you were saying, a landlord tenant, but I try to stay in that world. Like anything business, if you can buy or sell it, contract based, we're pretty much doing that kind of thing.
So Brian's specialized, right? He's not one of these guys that do 100 different things, and what do they call him? Jack of all trades, master of none, right? Yeah. Brian's like a master of the real estate business space.
Yeah.
So this is what he focuses on.
And I like always say, if I don't do it, let me know, because obviously I work with other professionals that do. I have an attorney I work with very well. He does wills, trusts, estate planning. That's a whole nother topic. Maybe somebody to bring on also for the next video.
For sure.
But it's things like that. So like I said, if I can't do it, I'll find you someone who probably can.
100%. He'll send you a referral. So guys, again, thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Hopefully more to come.
Enjoy.
Thank you.